Welcome, everyone. My name is Maria Melfa, and I am the president and CEO of the Training Associates, otherwise known as TTA.
And I'm Jocelyn Allen. I'm a talent recruitment manager here at TTA, and we're very excited to have you with us again.
We are very excited to have our special guest today, Kisha Dixon. Kisha has been a special partner with TTA for many years. As a training leader, public speaker, and culture change agent, Kisha Dixon, TTA Senior Learning Consultant, has seen leadership defined numerous ways over the years. With over 2 decades of experience designing and facilitating behavioral-based sales, coaching, and leadership solutions, Kisha's approach is refreshingly unique. She recognizes that identifying the specific rhythms in an organization's culture is the key to creating visible, empowering leadership and culture change. Never want to shy away from difficult conversations about the impact of race, culture, and diversity on expectations and performance. Kisha prioritizes keeping equity and inclusion top of her mind in her workshops and coaching sessions. She brings an innate ability to align an organization's vision and its people to meet their bottom line objectives. Clients have found her approach to building a high-performance and inclusive culture to be tangible, transparent, energizing, and honest, with the perfect touch of humor. Some of the organizations that her work has impacted include the Coca-Cola Credit Union, Broadway Bank, America Online, Girl Scouts of America, and notably the Girl Scouts of Kentucky Wilderness Road. Kisha played a significant role in helping the Girl Scouts of Kentucky Wilderness Road win the coveted Brandon Hall Group Gold Award for the best results of a learning program for leadership. The award was for the transformation of the council's antiquated legacy culture. What had started as a legacy culture with low morale, fleeting accountability, and chaos. With Kisha's help, she transformed them into a culture of collaboration and empowerment and transparency. Wow, that's pretty powerful, Kisha. Welcome, Kisha.
And now we're going to add podcast to that list. So your bio just got longer, Kisha.
Exactly.
Wow.
So
Thank you, Maria.
Oh, absolutely. So we're very excited to have you today. And as I mentioned, you've been one of our partners for many years, and your work has always been absolutely stellar. And we constantly get incredible reviews. As we mentioned, your approach, people love your ability to keep it real, be down to earth, and most importantly, give them the results that they're looking for in their training solutions.
Thank you. Hearing it all read out like that is a little humbling and embarrassing because I don't know how to respond, but thank you. I like working hard, and I like seeing the joy that comes when an organization realizes they actually have changed. So that's really what it's about for me.
You're fantastic at what you do. Here at TTA, we know your name the way that we know each other's. I mean, you are part of our team. We go to you for a lot of different things, but we're trying to reach the family beyond TTA here on this podcast. So for those who have not yet been introduced to the myth, the legend, Kisha, can you tell them a little bit more about you and what inspires you, and a little bit more about your journey to the program of diversity and inclusion that you've created? Because it's not really a direct route that people would normally expect, right?
No, it really isn't. It really isn't. I come from a pretty interesting background. My father was Air Force, and so we moved around a lot as a kid, and I became the professional new kid pretty quickly. That's hard enough, I think, as it is. Also happening to be a woman of color, or at the time a girl of color, and kind of smart and a little overconfident about how smart I was, often put a spotlight on me that, well, was just different. And I had to learn very quickly to read a room and acknowledge different cultures in different parts of the country, even in Japan, where I started school when I was young. And as I matured professionally, a lot of the lessons I learned about not believing in stereotypes and giving people a chance to show who they are really resonated with me as I started in sales and then teaching sales, worked on coaching and leadership. And it always comes down to everybody wants to feel seen, heard, and valued. And with that, I got a lot of requests from your team, Maria, asking me, when will you start doing diversity and inclusion training? You're doing fine with coaching and leadership. And my answer was always no, not right now. No, I'm not interested. And I truly think the reason I wasn't interested is I didn't want to offer another check the box HR mandated training that was lacking heart and lacking true application and how we work better together. Jocelyn, in answer to your question, how did I get here? To be perfectly frank, George Floyd was murdered last year at the beginning of a very scary pandemic season. And up until then, I was still being asked to create a diversity training workshop. My answer was still no. And after he was killed, I just felt the urge to help calm things down and have an important conversation in a safe space where we could be candid and a little uncomfortable and try to offer a little joy and grace into the space as well. So I said yes, and the rest is history, maybe.
How would you define diversity?
That's a question I actually ask in my workshops almost every day. A lot of people think diversity looks like me, African-American woman in America, or someone who has a different sexual orientation or physical disability. But in truth, diversity is all of our experiences, all of the things that make us authentically who we are, being brought into a space where those differences are embraced. For me, diversity is representation regardless of how you look, how you live, how you learn, how you love, bringing it all into one space and saying, you have worth here and you can be yourself so you can breathe. That to me is true diversity, which means it's a lot more than skin deep.
Yeah, I think that was a point that even in not preparation, but as we were discussing this podcast and how we wanted to bring light to the program that you've created, because it is so different for all of the reasons that you just mentioned, but also how we can broaden the scope a little bit to what like diversity is, because there are so many levels to it. It's important, it's difficult, it does make you uncomfortable, but recognizing what makes people different is what makes inclusive environments, and how we can at least take those steps to allowing every single walk of life to feel just like I don't want to say just like they are everybody else, but you have such a much more eloquent way of speaking to this, Keisha. I just love how you word everything, but you're right. It's important to recognize that diversity is why people are different and why that is a wonderful thing.
Yes.
Not about what restricts people from being different. And that can include race, gender, disability, learning differences, sexual orientation, gender, all of the things. So I thank you for mentioning that, because I recognize that makes you a much different training professional from others.
Well, thank you. I just think that we all walk around with the proverbial comic book thought bubble over our head with the things that make us feel that we're disqualified through life. It could be our weight, our age, how we communicate, introvert versus extrovert, as well as cultural differences through ethnicity and sexual orientation and gender identity. My daughter has dyslexia, Maria, as you know, and even that is a layer of diversity. Mm-hmm. And if we have to hide a part of who we are, how can we ever really share our gifts in an authentic way? We should be able to walk through life, roll through life with our head up without feeling like there's a target on our back for something that we really don't have very much control over at all.
Do you feel the definition of diversity evolved over the years?
Maria, I do. I feel like it is evolving. Mm-hmm. I think there used to be such a thing, and I hope it's becoming a thing of the past, of a diversity hire, where that meant you need a Black person, an Asian person, a person in a wheelchair or with some type of who's differently abled in some way. And that's so limiting to the real existences that people are living with every day. These days, a young person coming out of grad school looks at a company and they want to see where your layers of diversity are in an organization to become a part of it. They want to make sure that they have a place where they can belong as their authentic selves. And I think that we're on the right track.
So Keisha, unconscious or implicit bias is something we hear a lot about today. Can you talk more about what this is and what are the ways that leaders can address this within the workplace?
Okay, that's a big ask. I will do my very best. Mm-hmm. I think that we do use often the term unconscious and implicit bias as though they're synonyms, and they're not fully synonyms. Unconscious bias is any thought or assignment of meaning that you may not be consciously thinking about that can tell you to lean in or back up in a situation. We all have biases all day long that our brain is just trying to help us make quick decisions, but they're not really based on any real logic. So, I don't think I'm going to sit at that table. Those people seem blah, 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 fill in the blank. Our unconscious bias just kind of guides us through life. It tells us that people who went to our college or pledged our fraternity or sorority are better people than those who didn't, where distinction between favorite sports teams might make a difference in who you want to work with or who you want on your team. Those are the everyday cognitive things that kind of are little imprints about people or situations that are guiding us to make decisions that we may not even be aware of. We're most likely not aware of in the background. Implicit bias is a little bit different. It kind of goes more towards stereotyping groups of people and having feelings about groups of people that may not fully be on the surface for us. Imagine going to a doctor's appointment for something very serious, like, I don't know, cancer, for example, and your doctor walks in and they're very young looking. That gut feeling that says, go get a grown up, that's stereotype based on age. That probably would fall more into implicit bias. Thinking somebody must be great at mathematics or engineering because they're of Asian Pacific Islander heritage. Or assuming that if someone's African American, they must have grown up in an impoverished part of town and had a struggle financially. Those are the things that we might think about people, but not necessarily always say, because we have a picture of what their life should be or what their experiences are in our mind. Knowing that helps us be better leaders. Being aware of that helps us make better decisions when it comes to people. So when someone says something like, I don't know, I don't think he's a good fit, we can't let things like that go by because there might be an unconscious bias at play, or even worse, an implicit bias at place. So we just need to say, like, hey, when you say good fit, what do you mean? What specifically are you talking about? And the moment we can be candid amongst our teams, in our leadership circles, the way we communicate, the better we are at making good decisions about people that are based on their own attributes instead of prescribed ideas.
Yes, thank you very much.
We're doing a lot of talk here, Keisha, about why we feel that you are successful in what you do. And I think it would go a long way from your expert perspective to talk about what you feel makes a successful program, specifically diversity and inclusion. What's important to you to include to make sure that this has the outcome that it should?
That's a huge question. Thank you for putting me on the spot for that.
You are welcome.
I think there are many elements, and they're a lot simpler than we think. One is that one person or small group of people can't affect organizational change. There has to be a grassroots desire or interest across the organization. I think that's super important, or it feels like it's being forced instead of an opportunity to build a stronger culture. Another thing that I think really makes a successful program is for whoever's leading the diversity and inclusion efforts to take their time and really dig deep on a little self-awareness, using a little focus on emotional intelligence to start some tough conversations, and understand that not everybody's going to come into the conversation from the same perspective. So we have to offer grace, because we can't make mistakes and learn without knowing there's a space to be forgiven so we can learn. So I think don't go in too hard, too fast. It is definitely not a sprint. It's a marathon. Mm-hmm. And there are stops and starts, because we're talking about cultivating a different way of thinking and communicating. And a lot of us come from places where we haven't had a lot of opportunity or a lot of exposure to some differences, which makes it kind of scary to talk about. Your heart might be there, but it takes a while to catch up with the learning and everything. For me, the organizations that are willing to take it slow, to have the difficult conversations, and have leadership all the way down participate in those conversations, are the ones that I think are doing a lot more than checking off the box to say, we talked about this year, we're done, now let's move on to other important things. Another thing that's really helpful is having a really strong set of organizational values that you can tie your diversity effort to. It's kind of funny. If we show respect, if we're courteous, if we are good listeners, if we communicate with empathy, you guys know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Ask open-ended questions to let people tell their stories. And if we did that across the board, then more people would be safe to be themselves. I really hope that in the next couple of generations, we don't need diversity and inclusion training, because it's just a part of how we engage internally and externally in organizations, that everyone is seen as an individual that deserves respect and whose differences are appreciated. That might be a little lofty thinking on my part, but it's really about having a heart for people. And wanting to do the best for your people in your community is what's going to help you get to success, I believe.
Do you find that the biggest contributor to a lack of success when clients are taking on a program like this is that they do move too quickly? Or are there other factors that you've seen that make something unsuccessful beyond that?
Yes, and yes. All of the things. Trying to do too much too fast alienates people. It isolates. It puts walls of defense up. Not preparing a good communication plan to get people prepared for some changes that are coming obviously will undermine the best intended efforts. But more importantly, understanding that an organizational space is not going to cure all the world's ills. It's just going to help shape how we treat one another, our clients, and our partners. And if we can do that and focus on that instead of try to shove every traumatic, offensive, discriminatory, prejudiced, hateful event and target it at an audience to force an indoctrination. I don't know if we're going to keep this or not, y'all, but I'm just telling you what I think. When we try to force people to believe something, we're not giving them tools. Instead, why not offer different perspectives that can be used in future situations? Because we can't change the past, and that's important. One of the things I've really started saying in my own personal workshops is that I can promise you 3 things. My goal is not to make you feel guilty about where you're from or what skin you were born in, because that's super important. There will be no finger pointing, and there will be no blame game, because not a single person in this room can do anything about what happened 400 years ago, 4 days ago, or 5 minutes ago. We can only have choices about where we go going forward. And if you're okay with that, I think we're going to have a great dialogue today. And I can just see like all the shoulders go down and all the anxiety leave, because that's the fear, is that I'm going to have to sit in a class and somebody tell me what's wrong with me. So I think that if you have the heart for helping people see their part of inclusion, it just makes things go so much better.
That's exactly why, Keisha, your programs are very effective and why our clients always want you back because of your approach.
I've seen other approaches, and I can say I have respect for other approaches. They just don't suit me.
But that it goes back to what you said, too, that is very important, is how we not forcing the information and how we filter the information, how we're providing it, because people learn in different ways. So with a sensitive subject matter, I think it speaks volume about your passion to drive a change, is that you've thought of that next level. I'd love to talk a little bit more about that program because we're talking so much about where your background is, where it came from, but we haven't gotten to the meat and potatoes of what Got Bias is. So you have the class Got Bias, how to develop a mindset of inclusion in the workplace, where you talk about your own personal biases and the ways to build on the skills of self-awareness and self-management. Can you tell us a little bit more about this program and what the first step listeners can take to become more self-aware and more prepared to start this journey with you?
Got Bias is kind of funny because it's literally a question like got milk, right? Got bias. The answer is yes. And I think the most important thing is foundationally to set the tone that every one of us walks around with biases all day long, every day. And they're talking to us all day long, every day. And often they're just really wrong. They're not based on anything but gut feelings. And I like to talk about it from a humorous standpoint, like how much I hate cottage cheese, have hated it my whole life because my brain and my gut tell me so. I've never actually eaten it. And you can try all day long to convince me, but look at it. It's disgusting to me. That's how bias works. I actually haven't had it yet. Somehow I raised my kids and they never had it. And now I can call them and say, Rhea and Sierra, do you eat cottage cheese? And they're both like, no, because why? What are the chances of them feeding it to their kids in the future? Right? So sometimes we get these ideas and we hold on to them in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so by neutralizing the conversation around bias to something as ridiculous as cottage cheese, kind of allows us to enter into a broader conversation that's really about, we have lots of thoughts about lots of things that don't make sense. And the only way we will change our mind is exposure or proximity or experiences. So once we recognize that, we have more power over it. We can choose not to hear it. We can choose to challenge it. We can choose to call each other out on it in a candid and friendly and respectful way. So really what Got Bias is about is taking a deeper dive into looking at kind of where your influence comes from, what levels of diversity are not represented in your circle of influence, and being very intentional about where we get information about the lives of people we don't have proximity to, because we can't rely on a specific media source or that one thing your grandma told you 20 times or any of those things. Because the truth is, for a long time, to marry a Jewish person into the family was considered a taboo if you were not Jewish. That's very rarely the case anymore because proximity created a caring community that says, well, welcome to the family because you love my daughter or you love my son. There was a time where my parents couldn't drink out of certain water fountains, couldn't swim at certain swimming pools because they grew up in the 50s and the 60s. That time has passed, but they still have feelings about that. And some of those feelings got passed on to their kids. And unless we have experiences that show us other ways, we might still harbor the same feelings the generation before harbors. And the truth is, the world's moving so fast. We don't have time for all that. Just come on, get with it. So my approach is one of just taking very neutral examples and then drilling down to how we apply it to how we interact with people we don't know very well. And we have a little fun and sometimes a little tears and a lot of shocking moments, but it's all done, I hope and pray, every time in love and grace.
So how does an organization make sure that these programs have lasting effects and it's just not a compliance training or a one and done training? What are some ways that an organization can make these programs truly stick and be successful?
Oh, so many ways. And from a training standpoint, especially making sure we're having reminders about implicit and unconscious bias when we train how to coach, when we talk about performance reviews. That's really important to always keep equity of experience top of mind. Also, just involve the grassroots in your organization. They have a lot to say. So creating avenues for them to speak out and kind of communicate their needs will always feed more engagement and more inclusive programming. And just keep learning. I don't know. It's not a one and done. If it was a one and done, we wouldn't be having this conversation now.
So what do you exactly mean by performance reviews? By having a open, candid conversation with your employee or something other?
I think also just by having calibrations from a leadership perspective that challenges things like, well, they're not a good fit or whatever. Well, what do we mean by that? Like, what skills and behaviors are we expecting and what are we seeing or not seeing? So that those implicit biases don't get in the way of someone's career track. Also, just making sure we're aware of cognitive biases. Like there's halos, I think they call it halos and horns. You know, that person who did that one great thing back in 1997 and they were a rock star. So they get the prime projects and they get the spotlight all the time. They may be actually doing other things that's detrimental to the team or to the culture. But from a leadership perspective, they're your go-to person. And so they have a halo and you can't see any other areas to critique or develop. But all their colleagues can see them. That's a blind spot that can really hurt team morale. The other side is literally the other side. That one time you did that unfortunate thing in front of the wrong people at the wrong time. That big mistake, and it was 7 years ago, 5 years ago, and there's nothing you can do to move past it. Those things create a non-inclusive environment where people feel isolated and they feel unseen and unvalued. So just making sure we're having real conversations about why we say yes and why we say no, and that they're built on something that's observable, that's more objective than subjective. At the end of the day, diversity and inclusion are just methods to get to creating a community of belonging in the workplace. That's what it is. We want to create a place where our employees feel like they belong, they have a voice, they're seen, and they can be their authentic selves. Anything that doesn't allow that needs to be addressed, I believe. I've really enjoyed the virtual environment for lots of reasons. One, it's more relaxed in a lot of ways, especially with people working from home, because you get to see kids and cats and dogs. And to create a space that's welcome, you have to acknowledge and validate, like, no, let your son say hi. You know, what's your cat's name? Really engage people where they can relax. One of my favorite participants ever with a client sat in his big wingback chair in his library in his house and he smoked a pipe the whole 3-hour session. And it was amazing because he was himself, you know, and just chilled out and very cool. Sometimes people look like they're in witness protection too, but, you know, that's okay. But also allowing space for your introverts not to be on the spot and they can type in a question or a comment and get acknowledged without having to speak out in front of a group of people has been really nice. And I do get so many private messages, Maria. Sometimes they're just encouraging, like, oh my gosh, thank you for making that point. Yet they're private, which is kind of cute. It means it meant something to them. And other times people share their stories and their own experiences. And I can't fully watch everything, but every time we have a break or a little breakout session, I'm literally going back in, responding to those private messages to make sure everybody knows that they're heard and get their questions answered. And I often try my best to ask, do you mind if we share this out to the class? Because maybe it's a little easier for them if I just said, someone sent a private chat and asked this, and let them be anonymous in their space. I think that's been fun. Also, people get emotional. Allowing them to be able to turn off their camera and have a minute is so different than being locked in a physical space where you're kind of just stuck sitting in your emotions in front of a full group of people. And that, I think, has been really important as well.
I know when you did a class for us, a lot of us were, at home. And I think that was, it felt, comfortable for a lot of people.
It was. I think a lot of us came out of it thinking it was one of the best trainings we had been to, too, for a number of reasons that we've already talked about. But I think, recognizing that modality of the virtual training world didn't change its efficacy was huge.
And felt very comfortable asking questions.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Because I did have a lot of questions, and I know I talked to Keisha, about a lot of different things.
And I think they come up when you don't realize how many different layers there are to this topic. And then you're like, oh, wow, like I do have unconscious bias about this.
Yes.
And I'm not realizing that, this comes from this place.
Exactly.
And, things like that. It's an eye-opening experience.
Yes.
And I think it catches people off guard when they realize it internally that I think your initial reaction sometimes when you hear things like that is you're like, oh my God, I'm part of the problem. But the way that you approach it is that, no, I'm not here to play the blame game, but isn't it nice to fully realize what could actually be going on here? And let me tell you how we're going to fix it. Sometimes it's the only comfortable way to realize something brand new like that is to go, hey, Keisha, I'm over here in a private message and I need some help.
Yes.
Jocelyn, to one of the questions you had earlier about like my background as an instructional designer, one of the strengths of knowing how to design a program from bottom up is to really map out where you want it to go and what your end result is. So, for example, not everything has to be an example built on ethnicity, right? Or sexual identity. Let's share stories about people with cerebral palsy to illustrate a point. Let's share stories about, I have a little activity where I show a picture of two people and ask, where's the diversity in this picture? And they often go to skin color, right? And then I'll say, well, which one speaks 6 languages out of a young black man and a young white man? And they're like, oh, we don't know. Oh, well, which one's an immigrant? Oh, we don't know. Which one has a prosthetic limb? We don't know. How do you get to know where the true diversity lies? You have to talk to people. You have to engage with people. And I think that aha moment is a big one. It's just like, oh, yeah, we can assume a lot of things, but we don't know the truth until we invite someone to share their own experiences with us. And so what I try to do when I map out a program is to find neutral ways to make really big points that are not always culturally or racially charged. Because if it's race all day long, then we're missing out on all the other layers of diversity. And they're important.
Yes.
Well, right, because if you talk about inclusion, but it's not to exclude all of those layers of diversity that we're talking about.
We even talk about parents with autistic children. That an inclusive environment is when your local movie theater chain might have sensory screenings for children and families films so that all the kids in the family can go and enjoy the movie without the worry about flashing lights and 3D surround sound and all the things that could trigger a neurodiverse child. So the whole family can go together instead of leaving the one child behind. Like there's such a value in that is not really known to people who are not living that experience. Right. But I have friends with autistic kids and it means everything.
Right.
Yes.
To them. To take all their kids to the latest Disney movie when the world opens back up,
Right.
that matters.
How would you advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion with colleagues who maybe don't understand its importance?
I would say very carefully. Again, we don't want to isolate and we don't want to create conflict for the sake of conflict. However, most people see the world from a very limited viewpoint, most of us. Our circle of influence is very much like ourselves, and we can kind of get stuck in little echo chambers and like almost like a funhouse effect, like seeing distorted reflections of self, right, in our own personal circle. And I think the best way is to appeal to the fact that you know they're a good person and that you know that they don't actually have hate in their hearts, because most people don't. Most people just know what they were told they should believe. And those are not the same thing. The best way to advocate is just to share by proximity, to help people see that they have a choice to care. There's a video I share a lot about the young man with cerebral palsy. He has a little video where he's traveling from Manhattan to Brooklyn to try a bagel, but it takes him an hour to leave the hotel because the people in the elevator don't step out to let the kid in the wheelchair in. But all it takes is even hearing that story. Most of the time, the people in the workshops are like, oh my gosh, that will never be me. Just by seeing it play out from that young man's perspective allows people to say, oh, wow, I've been trained not to see certain people. And I ask at the end, like, how many of you would ever see a person in a wheelchair trying to get on an elevator and not step off? Like, no, we're stepping off the elevator to let the person with the wheelchair on. Sometimes it's just exposure to someone else's lived existence. And you can see it in the way the country has made great strides when it comes to LGBTQ, how the way the country has made great strides when it comes to interracial marriage, the way the country's made great strides with trying. In general, there are always the fringe who's very loud and obnoxious and gets all the spotlight. But mostly, people don't care how you worship. People don't care who you love. And those who do usually just don't know anybody who's different from them. It's truly about proximity, which also means I have to show that I care to the people who aren't quite where I am. Everything doesn't have to be a fight, and you can walk away. So if someone doesn't understand the importance, it's okay. Working with you anyway. Let's talk about areas where we can agree and keep being inclusive of them to show them that they matter too. As long as they're not being offensive or rude or belittling someone else, let them be. The only person we can change is ourselves. Don't kick grandma out of the family because she has an older way of thinking. Just let her know you don't have to hear everything she has to say.
Our discussion today is going to hit home for a lot of people who recognize this as a need, are looking to implement it. Some, if not all, might be ready to pick up the phone and dial 1-800-KEISHA right now. Please don't, because I was going to say, I don't know. I was going to say, I was like, don't though, because I don't know who you're getting. But what would you say to those who have obviously gotten a really good taste of what this could do and what this might look like? What's their first step to getting something implemented, getting something started at their organization?
Honestly, do a little cultural assessment. Hire a consultant to come in and just take a look at, like, what's the appetite for this conversation? Yes, there are things that need to come from the top down, but so much of this has to be driven from the bottom up, right? There has to be an appetite for it. So I would say that whatever group you start with, before you start implementing strategy and setting up things, do some exercises within your small group.
What does cultural assessment look like?
And a cultural assessment might be just a way of getting a sense of, is there a sense of belonging and inclusion in your culture? Do people based on their demographics feel equally heard and seen and validated? Show you where your blind spots are when it comes to the diversity in the organization, and it helps guide us to make better decisions. Are we recruiting for a truly diverse talent pool? If we're recruiting for diverse talent pool, are we churning too many of those people? Are they not staying very long? If they're not staying very long, why not? Are our leaders supporting and upholding our organizational values on how we treat one another? Are we giving a fair shake to everyone? And I think kind of one of the other things is practice listening without interruption or contradiction or comparison when somebody is sharing their lived experience, because they're trying to tell you something important. And oftentimes it's dismissed as, oh, well, that doesn't happen here, or that's not really a problem. But I can say that, you know, as a person of color, there are things that happen to me in my life, everyday things that remind me that other people don't see me as equal. And it's hard to explain those things to managers or bosses, or I might be a little more irritated, or my colleagues are making comments that clearly make me feel like I don't belong. If there's no place for me to go, I'm leaving your organization. If there's no one willing to hear me. So I think really having deep, candid conversations internally in a small group to just say, okay, what's the truth about our culture? And what can we change? And often it's just the way we listen, the way we ask questions. There's simple things we can do. Problem is, simple's rarely easy. It's not easy. Another really easy thing to do is just be a better human. I know that sounds funny, but I do believe that's what it's about. When big things happen that impact people who are generally marginalized, like, and I mean big things, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, you guys know what I'm talking about. The big things happen. You can check in with your people without actually giving your opinion. Hey, you know, I've been watching this on the news and I've thought about you and your family. How are you all doing? Do you have everything you need? How are your kids doing? How's your mom and dad doing? I don't fully understand, and you don't have to fully understand, but I know you, and I support you, and I respect you, and I care about you, so let me check in with you. And we're not doing it to be performative. We're doing it because we're leaders who care, and it doesn't matter what our opinion is. It just matters what their experience is. Those are simple things we can do while we figure out the big stuff. Is just be present and be genuine and be willing and courageous to say you care without having to feel like you have to have a solution. So my dad, because I have to throw a Skipism in, my dad's name was Skip. My dad was the king of all the quotes and cliches. But one of the things I remember him telling me when I was very young was, it's not your job to fix it. It's just your job to show you care. And I think that really is the heart of it, right? Is I know you're hurting. I can't possibly understand to what depth, but I do want to let you know that you're on my mind, you're on my heart. And if there's anything I can do, just know I'm here for you. Period. Like that's all people want to hear. My best friend is Filipina and somehow forgot to ask her how her family was doing with all this anti-Asian sentiment, because I've known her my whole life. She shares all kinds of things with me. And then one day I just happened to ask her and I was just like, you know, how's your mom handling? Is she having any negative interactions with folks? She's like, my mom is not going out because of COVID, but you know, yeah, there's some stuff. We're just dealing with it because it's not as bad as what happens, you know, to blacks. And I was just like, oh my gosh, no. There's no trauma Olympics here. Your experiences are just as valid as my experiences. She felt like she couldn't say anything or complain because of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And that's just not the way it like, we're not comparing or competing. you're my friend. I love you. I want to know you're okay. You're my colleague. I respect you. And I want to know if you need time or space or if you're okay. I think that's all we have to do. And we just try to make it so much more than that. Maya Angelou's one of my favorite authors ever in life. And one of the things that she's always talked about is her regrets, the things she learned through mistakes in her life. And one of my favorite quotes, and she said it a lot of ways over many years, but at the time I did what I could with what I had. And then when I learned better, I did better. And I think she just sums up life in such a hopeful and grace-filled way. We can only do what we can with what we have in any given moment. And we don't get redos. We just get to learn and keep doing better going forward. And that's how we calm this stuff down. That's how we see one another. That's how we can make an impact by doing little things. And those little things add up to big things. And they're happening. I have hope.
I do too.
I do too. Absolutely.
I have hope.
Well, Keisha, this was absolutely fantastic. I felt like out of all of our podcasts that we have recorded so far, this has been one of the hardest ones to actually interject because everything that you said was spot on. Right. That I really felt like I had absolutely nothing to add to this.
I talk too much.
No, not at all. It just, my mind is spinning 90 miles an hour right now, just with so many thoughts. Which is a great thing.
It is. You've provided so much insight in such a delicate yet profound way that I always leave, you know this, Keisha, I tell you this all the time. No matter if it's a quick phone call checking in or a new opportunity or follow up on something else, anytime we talk, I feel like I am coming out of it motivated to be a better person. And thank you for sharing that with our listeners. It's just, we need more Keishas. Yes. We need more gut bias training. And I think that you are a huge part of the start to a more inclusive and better world. I really do.
Well said.
You are so generous. I will just say thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed this discussion, and I love being a member of the TTA family. So
we love to have you.
Thank you for making me feel very welcome, like I belong.
Keisha, thank you so much,
Keisha.
We'll talk to you soon.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
For more information on today's podcast guests and how they can help your organization, please visit www.thetrainingassociates.com.
Bring Out the Talent is a Mudhouse Media production.